Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This is one of the training series videos, and in this one we're looking at variants of the common question, which kind of boils down to something like, I can't seem to get my mix loud enough, but it clips, as in it goes into the red, it goes over loud and therefore will distort, but it still sounds too quiet. What do I do? Now, to be perfectly blunt, the most honest, correct answer to this should always be hire a mix engineer. People don't want to hear that, especially these days, but a mix engineer is the solution here. If you can hear that there's something wrong but you don't know how to fix it, then you don't understand mixing. In the early days, the 60s and 70s, we weren't called mix engineers, we were called balance engineers, which is actually in many ways a far better term. Being a mix engineer is somewhat like being a Jedi. You don't get to be a fully fledged Jedi until you have spent time and trained with a master. Not by going to like Jedi University and paying for a degree. You actually spend time with a master and you get to move forward once that master feels like you have achieved enough to move from a learner to an actual Jedi. The same is true with mixing. Now, the reality is, even in Star Wars, with Jediism, that not everybody gets to be a Jedi. You can't just put up your hand and go, please, sir, can I be a Jedi? They might well test you to see if you have any kind of Jedi-ness about you, if you have any sort of forceful thing. But if you don't, they're just going to say, sorry, dude, go be a motorbike rider or something. This is not for you. If you show some aptitude, but don't have enough, either enough ability to control the force or enough ability up here to feel it, they will go, thanks very much. Go be a motorbike rider. Find something else that suits who and what you are. The reality is, as mix engineers are born this way. A lot of us are actually on the autism spectrum. That's part of what makes us great at what we do. That doesn't mean if you're autistic that you're immediately going to be a great mix engineer. It's like me going to surf school and saying, I've decided I want to surf, make me Kelly Slater. They're going to spend a couple of seconds with me, and they're going to know whether I'm potentially able to surf, potentially able to be Kelly Slater. He was world champion in surfing, if you don't know anything about that. And otherwise, they're going to go, yeah, look, we can spend some time, we can have a laugh, but really you should go ride a motorbike. Because I've not got any aptitude for that at all, despite trying for a year. The reality is, the best answer to the I can't seem to get my mix loud enough but it just clips is really hire a mix engineer. But I understand that many people are unwilling to do that. I question their commitment to their craft. It's like buying a Formula One team and then hiring me to drive that Formula One car. You're going to lose every time. One would wonder how committed you are to running a successful Formula One team. You sort of go, Ayrton Senna, are you available? That much. Ooh. Yeah, that's what it takes. If you're not, you're not, and that's okay. So really, the only other option is to learn. And again, like I've said, you can spend time in a mix engineering learning to be phase, but chances are, if you are not designed for this, if this is not, you don't have the right amount of mix engineeriness in your actual makeup, you won't get that far. Fine. Go do what you're good at. If you're proving to be good at writing songs or playing guitar or whatever, that's what you need to focus on. But I also know there are going to be a whole pile of people who go, but, and come up with reasons they're going to push ahead. In which case, I will try to give you solutions, but understand these are not going to be what you're used to hearing, and they're going to be an awful lot more work, and they're going to require a lot more understanding. Something that a natural Jedi will get, a non-natural Jedi will never really get. The first thing, as is usually my way, is we're going to wipe off the things that people say but will not solve your issue. Because I see this question over and over. It's almost like every week it's asked a time or two. I can't seem to get my mix loud enough, but it clips. As soon as the drums come in, it clips. And so people will say, well, you need more advanced techniques. Number one, there is no such thing as an advanced technique in mixing, nor is there any such thing as a secret. I know that there are lots of videos sold under this kind of guise of we'll give you advanced tips, we'll give you the secrets. The only secret is there is no secret and there are no advanced tips. There really just isn't. You get to a point where you feel a thing or you don't feel a thing. That's the only complex thing to it. And the complexity comes that if you try to keep pushing ahead when you don't feel it, like me going to Hawaii and facing like 10-meter waves when I can't surf. But I will prove my ability to make a fool of myself and die. That would be my business. So there is no simple fix. There are no advanced techniques or secrets being held away from you. Get that off the table straight away, because believing that does you far more damage than good. Yes, it gives you the sense that, somewhere in the future I will be able to luck on getting this amazing tip or technique and it'll solve my problem. But it won't. In the meantime, me, Hawaii, 10-meter wave, dead Benedict. Not wise. You'll get the compress or limit everything. Take your mix and just... We'll look at that in a moment. It doesn't work. If your mix isn't fundamentally set up to be the way you need it to be, compressing it will just make it worse. It'll make it louder. I give you that. It will definitely make it louder, but it'll make it worse. Louder is never better. You will get someone who's sort of saying the right thing. Send it for mastering at -6 dB. It's good that they're encouraging you to go to a professional, assuming that you choose somebody who's actually skilled and experienced. There'd be no point saying, look, I'm having problems with my neighbor and his stormtroopers are shooting up my crops, and going to the worst Jedi you could find. It's not going to work out well for you. You need to go to a good Jedi. You hope that Yoda comes out and talks to you and the farmer and solves whatever stupid problem that you've set yourself up for. Sending it for mastering won't help, because while if they're a great mastering engineer, they're just going to say, please take this away and fix it. I can't give you what you want. That's honest. That's good. They're being honourable. There are plenty of hacks and fools who will take it and simply make it loud, give it back to you, it'll be loud. Part of you will be like, oh great, it's nice and loud, but another big part of you is going to be, this isn't right. And then that'll make you go, all these guys are shonks, and you're choosing the wrong guys. So that's not a solution. Sending it for mastering is not a solution. It's not going to solve your problem. And then somebody else is going to say, gain staging, set everything to -18 dB and you'll be right. Okay. That's like me when I'm trying to learn to surf and really have no aptitude for it. And someone says to me, buy more sex wax. That's the wax that you put on your board so you don't fall off. Okay, it might give me better traction, but it's not going to give me the whatever it is that you need in your heart, your soul, your body to be able to hang 10 dude and to seem like Patrick Swayze. It's just not going to happen. So gain staging is just like the stupid thing to say, but you get to say something in a forum. All right, let's get rid of those. It's important we get rid of those, because otherwise people will come into the things that you can do, you should do, that are just fundamentals of mixing, still assuming that those things are true, and that colours everything that they look at or think. So let's look at something that I put together. Now, before someone says, but the music sucks. Yes, the music sucks. I put this together. Actually, it takes quite a lot of time just to put these exercises together to make sure that they're right and rehearsed and all of that. If you want better music, if you want more real music and your music's better, then please send it over. Otherwise, this is a training exercise. This is designed really to help people see and hear the difference. All we're looking at is the difference. We're not looking at whether this music's any good. We're looking at hearing the A to B difference. If you can't hear that, then that's okay. It simply says you're probably not destined to be a mix engineer, and the smartest thing that you can do is to make friends with a skilled and experienced person to do that. Just like if I'm arguing with my neighbour and his stormtroopers are coming and shooting up my crops, I really want to be on the phone to Yoda to say, hey, we got a problem here. Can you help us resolve this? Us resolve it. Not me going, you go over there and lightsaber his stormtroopers so they can't come. Yoda's just going to go, dude, you got the wrong idea here. So here's one I prepared earlier. As you see, it says really no mixing. I just bounced this off. Now, everything's here and it sort of works, but it's kind of not where people are going to want it to be. It lacks any kind of elegance, and as a result, people will feel like it lacks punch, and because they don't really understand that concept of punch or presence, and everything these days is about loud, they're going to go, it's not loud enough. So what will happen is, if we were to follow our friend who told us that compression and limiting is the solution, then we would end up doing this. Okay, now it's louder, but is it any better? I'm going to argue that no, it's not. Because it's just physically got a little bit louder, but it hasn't gotten any impact. If anything, we've lost impact because we've sacrificed an awful lot of dynamics. Well, there's a lot in here in the first place, but we've sacrificed what we did have and simply flattened everything up against the glass. And, well, that's not very attractive. So while this gets us somewhere, it doesn't get us where we want to be. Have a look at our meters here. Look at the peaks, which will be up here in both cases, and listen to the difference. Same peaks. Our RMS has come up. Now this is louder than I would ever want to mix it, and possibly a little splatty, but it's an exercise. Notice how suddenly it's so much bigger. This is what we're chasing. We should never be chasing volume. We should be chasing the feeling of size. So if we take this and pull it back, so now our numbers are roughly the same on the RMS. This one still has better presence. This is an important part of the learning here, that it is never about volume or level, anywhere near so much about presence, the ability to reach out and grab you. If you're saying, I can't get my stuff loud enough, you're really saying I can't get the right kind of presence. Turning the level up is actually not going to get you there, because you're still never going to have the right kind of presence. You'll get louder and louder. You'll squash any potential dynamics, which is difference between things that are meant to be loud and soft, and therefore you will have actually less presence. You'll have some real difficulties. Mixing is about stages. It's really important to understand this. Stage one of a great mix is a great composition. Let's assume that loudness is really important, because I know everyone's obsessed with it, so we'll say fair enough. So stage one of a loud mix is actually a loud composition. As in, when you compose this piece of music, it needs to be dynamic enough and alive enough that people are going to feel like, oh, that's huge. Let's pick, for an example, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. That's a massive sounding song, as is Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. And not just the boom, 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 boom. Everything about that song is like, it's monolithic. That's why it's stood the test of time with both of those songs. They have been composed as big. They are epic tracks. Not because they've got some silly strings going bum ba 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 ba. That's not epic, that's just stupid. But they are so well composed, they tell such a great and powerful story, whether you can comprehend what that is consciously or not, that they are big. And because they're big, then we could say they are a loud composition, because they get your attention. So it's very important to have good dynamics and a track that's very alive. Made a whole video on arrangement. If your arrangement is poor, you'll go nowhere. I watched a track on YouTube, some band, blah, 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 don't know who they were. It was a bit of a mishmash of this, that, and the other. Starts, and I'm kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's pretty bombastic. By the time I'd gotten about a minute in, I was beginning to get bored. By the time I got halfway through, I really could have turned it off after about a minute. There was nothing else there. So while initially, yes, it was loud, and it did have impact, it went nowhere. Therefore, my interest in it fell off really fast. In other words, it was not a loud piece at all. It was a very quiet, boring, easy to ignore piece. It was cooler to turn it off and listen to nothing than this thing that was just wasting my time. Not about being mean. I was predisposed to liking it. It started nicely, and I thought, ooh, that could be a bit of a winner. And if that's where pop music is going to go, then I'm all for it. But no. And there have been a lot of other records where I've sort of listened through and the song starts, it turns on, and it loop, 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 turns off. It's like, that can never be loud. It won't feel loud because it's got no dynamic in the composition. So number one, you must have a loud composition or you can't get a loud mix. Number two is you have to have a loud mix. You can hear here, this is never going to seem loud. It's always going to feel a little detailed and light. It's never going to get us there. This immediately becomes like, ooh, big. Even when we pop it in here into like iPhone mode, it's still got a kind of a bigness to it. Nasty sort of Bluetooth tub, there's still a bigness to it. So the mix itself is designed to be big and loud. We will look at how to approach that sort of thing. I'm not here to tell you how to make loudness wars kind of stuff, you know, where you've got a dynamic range of two loves. Not interested in that. It's poor work. But nonetheless, some songs really want to sound loud, and there is an art in getting them to do that. The rock band Boston were absolute masters of sounding enormously loud, even though they weren't. I mean, obviously, Tom Scholz's guitar had the guitar soak, the power soak, and all of that. There was loudness happening, but in terms of when you put the record on, especially if you put on Third Stage, which is a massive sounding record, it's actually quieter than a lot of other records, but it feels enormous. And then finally, obviously, we need a loud master. But we cannot get a loud master, as you heard here. This doesn't actually sound or feel loud in any way. It just sounds too much volume. Whereas when we took this one and pulled it back, the roughly 6 dB here, so that its VU was parity with the first one, it still had more to it. So you can do a loud master only once you've got a loud composition with a loud mix. And then you can get that over loud kind of thing if that's what you're looking for, or just that enormous. You know, listen to, I said Boston's Third Stage, listen to U2's live EP, Under a Blood Red Sky. That's huge sounding. It feels enormous. You want to turn up the volume, not because it isn't loud enough, but because it's like, oh, this will be better if I can add another 100,000 watts to it. That's great mixing. It really is, because they were great songs, great performances. All right, so let's look at some things that we can do. The very first thing is, as I've said, composition. I'll pop it up here. There's a whole video on arrangement that I made. Please spend some time with it. This is not a 2-second thing and go, oh, well, I've got that formula of ABC. Now I'm loud. No, there's an awful lot more to it. The whole concept of it, you've got to be able to feel. If you can feel that, say, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody is bigger than most songs in its impact, or the same with Lucky Phil's In the Air Tonight, then you're partway there. You've got to learn how to make that happen out of your own music. And your music has to have a powerful story to tell. Now, that doesn't mean that it's literal. Sometimes it can be. Johnny Cash, Sunday Morning Coming Down, Chris Christopherson wrote it. That's a powerful song, so I'll say that's a loud song. Its impact echoes down the decades because it's great work. It's got a powerful story. And let's choose something that was really pretty shallow but did work. I think it was Operation Blade, Base in the Place, London. Base in the Place, London. That was about it. It was the whole song. Done. Base in the Place, London. But it worked. It was loud. Or about 10 years before, the KLF, 3am Eternal, What Time Is Love. Enormous feel. It can be done at any point. Understand the difference in feel, find out what the story is you're telling, and make sure that you tell it well. Then you have a good composition, and that must have a good arrangement, so there's dynamics in your arrangement. And that is not just going, oh, well, I'll have a drop and then a build-up. That can work. Sasha's Adelante. That works. But it works because it's kind of a neat piece of music. It's not as good as Guru Josh's Infinity from 10 years before, but it still works because Sasha's music was fundamentally, well, music. Keep your instruments focused. Most people talk about this at the mix, but it helps so much more if this has been considered at the composition and performance stage. If something is meant to take the lead, then make sure it takes the lead. And that will mean automating your instruments and changing your performance. So if you want the piano to seem, you've got to play it so that it seems. And the point where you want it to feel all kinds of, then you have to play it like this. You can't just be the whole way through or input everything at MIDI velocity of 100 and say that's it. You've got to know, you've got to feel, you've got to understand. Again, if you're a natural, you'll have some of that already. You may not quite know how to do it, but you'll have a lot of it already, and you will be solving your problems as you meet them. Your solutions may be a little unusual, but that's great, so long as the problems are being solved. But if you don't know how to solve them and asking the internet, that's why I say you're not hearing it. You may be hearing it at the end going, it doesn't work out right, but you're not hearing it before, which is where the dilemma is. So make sure that you compose to keep your instruments in a way in which they are focused for the time. We will look at some of that a little bit later, but when the guitar solo comes in, other instruments should step back a little bit. If they don't step back, if you've still got the 4,000 beats per second of the double kick drum going as loud as possible, then how are people going to be able to focus on the widdly, widdly, widdly bit? They're not, in which case you've got to move things back. It could be level. It can also be the intensity of the performance. Remember, the piano might want to go like this in the loud bit, but like this in the not loud bit. So when the guy's going widdly, 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 you might still be playing the same sort of thing, but you might just back it down. So it's not like this because you need to leave space for the widdly, widdly, widdly bit. Really important. If you don't compose it right, it will never mix right. Even if someone like me goes, okay, we've got to pull that level back, it's not going to mix right because it'll still sound like somebody playing like this with the level pulled back. It'll help a bit, but it won't give you the same result of somebody doing this rather than because that's the only way they know how to do it, or they think, oh, it's got to be loud all the time. Understand your dynamics within the piece. Then, a loud mix. I will try and move through this fairly quickly and reference you to other videos. The first thing that we need to do is understand transients. Here's a picture I prepared earlier. On the far left, we have the original sound. Let's say this is a snare drum. That's our original sound, and we can see the 0 dB line. Thou shalt never exceed the 0 dB line because it goes splat. And that's the problem. Because it's a very spiky sound, it's exceeding the 0 dB. That might be okay on recording, especially if you record it at 32 bits, if you watch the video on that. But at the moment, the problem is it's too loud, it's clipping. So we solve that simplistically, naively, by saying, well, we'll pull the level down, which is the one in the middle. As you can see, we've still got the spiky bit, but it's very quiet, and there's, most importantly, no sense of impact. There's just like a little tick emotionally. There's no sort of like coming from this at all. And that makes you then go, oh, well, I'm going to turn it up. And you're right back where you were at the beginning. It's kind of loud, but it's clipping and it's blowing a hole through the rest of the mix. You've got no balance here. Remember, mix engineer is a balance engineer. You've got no balance. So you've got to know how to make that sound balance out in the mix so that it plays the role that it's meant to play. And in some pieces, that little tiny snare that just goes beep, beep, is perfect because you don't want too much emphasis on that snare. In others, where it just blows a hole through everything, yeah, that could make sense. You could turn everything else down, your whole mix is down, but you've got this massive spike above it. It's probably not going to work out. That's probably what you've been doing and why everything sounds too quiet, because you're being driven by this transient. But transients are, by their very nature, as they say, transient, as in they're passing. They pass very quickly. So we need to work out how to change the shape of that sound. Remember, if we're working with a synthesizer, the way that we control the level over time is with an envelope, an attack, a decay to the sustain portion, and the release. You can see that there with the third one. We've got instant attack, there's a little bit of decay, something that's like a sustain, and then the release where it drops off at the end. That's far more workable. What we've done in this case is, well, obviously change the picture, but we can assume that we compressed this so that we pushed down the overall levels, pulling up the overall level. Now, that could be problematic, that particular sound there, because it's now enormous, but the 80s did a lot of that kind of stuff. Great big snares, gated reverbs, which allowed them to be kind of this long, but then they chopped them off so that they could get out of the way for the next thing to come. Otherwise, it's just a wash. But the gating on them actually made them seem even bigger. Again, doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it, but that's a great example. That gated snare is a great example of this shape. We want to make our sound longer more often than not, because forget volume. Volume is not the best way of handling things. The length of a sound has a big impact on how we perceive it. So the longer the sound, the more it has presence. So a little blinky, 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 kind of a, let's say a harp, blinky, 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 doesn't have that kind of impact. There's a reason why the harp isn't the lead instrument in death metal, because it's blinky, blinky, blinky. Whereas a BC Rich with like 14 distortion units at once, it is a brick. So it's so solid, so long, that it's perceived as being enormous. So your compression, we're not going to go through compression too much here, there are other videos on that, is all just about saying, I can reshape this sound so that it serves the purpose of this song. Not every song. We don't want everything to be mixed exactly the same. That's not mixing at all. Balancing is about saying, how do I get the elements that I have got to tell the right story? So understanding transients is the first thing. If my mix is clipping, but it still doesn't seem loud, especially when the drums are in, then you just haven't managed your transients. And you've got to manage your transients, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of problems. So the compression is one of the first things that we do. If we have a look at our drums here, we have a compressor here. Let's pull the other things out for the moment. Put it back in. This is incredibly fast, like really fast. It's about 1/10 of a millisecond on its attack, and it is designed to just squish. And it's doing that as you see the levels change dramatically from actually up in clip, because even this isn't coping with it. To creating space whilst getting louder. So just like that picture, we've squished our dynamic. It does make the sound completely different, but that's what compression does. It's a good thing when used well. I would not say this was used well, unless, of course, we were after the very result that I have gone for here, which is to be huge. There are other factors that I've put in here, which are also part of making sure that we get a great mix. We'll come back to them in a moment. The other thing that we have here is clipping. Limiting is fine, but the problem with limiting is it tends to, well, really squash things. Actually, let's go back to our first instance. Let's undo that. It's limiting here. A lot of limiting. This sounds kind of trapped. That's a clipper. It's still not exceeding, but it sounds more open. So what a limiter does is a very, very heavy-handed compressor. It pushes down. You can see that here. It's just pushing down. Whereas a clipper doesn't have a readout that shows you like that. I know some of them do, but that's not actually accurate. What happens is that a signal goes above the threshold, the point, and it just goes, you shall not pass. Clips it off, hence called clipper. So the clipper is being used in this instance here with the compressor to hack some off the top. And that's how we get the bigger sounds. Because I can actually cut some off, as you heard with the other one, I can raise the level without raising the numbers. So in this case, we push some drive in. We've got 6-7 dB of gain. We've pulled it back about 3 dB. So the other 4 dB, where's that gone? It's been samurai sworded off, or laser sworded off. To a certain extent, you can't always hear clipping, but you can hear it. It's a bit heavy-handed here, but I wanted the results to be dramatic. They're that. So reshaping our sounds is the first thing that we do with regards to mixing, but we've also got to make them balance. If they don't balance, then we're kind of nowhere at all. We also have to look at space. Now, the original version here has no space at all. So it doesn't feel big even when it's loud. I know that's a little bit of a modern thing, but this... massive difference. Remember, even when we pulled back a whole pile of dB, then we still ended up with the mixed version feeling louder. So we need to define a space. There's a whole thing on reverb. But here I've actually got a send reverb, which is over here. Hertz delay, of course. But I've also used this multiplier. This is serving two purposes here. One is to be a reverb, which I'm then pushing into that compression, so it gets squished inside the compression. So this is the drum room. These are dry drums. They're Goran's Handy Drums, a studio legend. They are dry, so I chose them because they're dry, and so that I could do this to show you. By doing this, they end up seeming much bigger. The Rock Standard already have the room in them, the live real room, as Goran says to me, and that's a big standard in rock that you push that into the compressor, but I wanted to be, really sure I could overdo it, and you can see the difference between not there. So what we're doing is we're making those drums last longer because of all that reverb that goes into them. That's a really important part of things. It's space. You've got to have space. Even though this is very, very full at this point, there's still space in this mix. There's more space in this mix, like this, than than there is like this. This is flat. You've got no sense of space, depth. This not only comes forward, but because it has a sense of back. You can't get forward, that like right up, without there being a back. And a lot of people make that mistake. They say like, I'll push everything forward. It's like this. You've got no sense of perspective here because there's no backwards and forwards. Whereas now, you've got a backwards and forwards. Oh, geez, those hands are huge and forward, and that face is way back. Doesn't my face look so tiny? Take it away, my face appears now to be more normal sized because of perspective. And so reverbs and delays and echoes are a vital part of doing that, which have been done all the way through here. If we look at our guitars, we've got that makes them sound so much nicer, gives them a position in the room, in the piece, and so therefore they sound better. Here they disappear. Now because they have a space, they're actually pulled back at this point, they work much better. So it's really important that you're looking all the time to say, how can I define the space and where this sits, the role that it's playing with EQ, with panning, echo, reverb. Really, really important here. I'm not going to show you through the EQ there. I've made plenty of videos on EQ for particular devices and in general. In this case with this sound, I can show you is that. Let's go reverse up. I've clarified that in solo. This sounds better because it's more full. But within a mix, that helps give it better presence. The difference is kind of subtle because it's heavy-handed, but nonetheless this is an important part of the mixing thing. Compression we've looked at in terms of the flatten, splatten kind of thing, but the other form of compression is what you see up here. When we start to, we'll just pop all of these out for the moment. I will leave him there. We'll pop them out. It's kind of flat. Can you hear that there's a better sense of dynamic, of groove? You can really feel this way. Whereas here we don't feel it as much. That's my favorite kind of compression. You'll see that we've got a much slower attack. And in this case, quite a short release. We're looking to reshape. Remember, we reshaped that drawn snare drum, and as you saw with the drums here, we've made them longer. In this case, we actually want to make a greater sense of dynamic between the loud and the not so loud. So we're using our compression to drive the groove up and down. Made several videos with this as well. That's the other kind of compression. I definitely do that on buses or across whole mixes, but I will also do it on instruments as well. If I had decided to compress this bass, then I would have done it. Actually, we can look at here. I should have looked at this one probably. Kind of flat. It's not my drum programming. Flat. It has some movement. Yes, everything's a little overdone here, but again, it was about effect. and it sounds a lot worse in headphones than it does in speakers. So that's the real form of compression that you really want to learn far more. They just turn everything down to the fastest attack possible. There is value in that kind of compression, but there's far more value in this kind of compression. You probably will hopefully heard it more up here, where your track suddenly gets more dynamic and therefore feels larger, which is louder. It has more impact on the soul. So get your head around that kind of compression. It takes time. You can't do that in 5 minutes and understand it. It takes time. Some people will have a natural feel for it, but most engineers, even good ones, it takes quite some time for them to really feel compression and, oddly enough, reverb. They are complex subjects. All right, so that's all of those, and then the other one is really important. Remember I said that the with the drums multiplier was here for a couple of reasons. We'll look at the acoustic guitar. Let's go back here. Feel how flat and dead this is? It's embarrassing. Whereas here, it feels alive. Into the piece, everything feels very dead. That acoustic guitar, which is over on one of the sides, feels nice. That is in part for a couple of things. Remember, it's never one thing. There's never one fix for any of these. But the first thing here is multiplier. I'm using this for the primary purpose, which was not a reverb, but to create movement. Now it's adding a little bit of level. But hear how it has better impact. It's brighter, more lively. Go watch the video on multiplier to understand how it works, but I'm making this sound move. Somewhat like tape plugins that add a little bit of movement. Not that drunken lo-fi wonky thing, but a lot more subtle than that. So it's like a form of saturation, only moving your sound. You can do it with EQs, by making the EQ mobile. I showed that in the Kirchhoff, more with dynamic, but it's also possible to do with an LFO to make your EQ point move a little bit. You've got to be careful, but once you get that right, that can be great. You can take a drum loop, which is just 1 bar or 2 bars, and it's always the same snare. You can make the snare sound different on each hit, and not many people are going to pick what's been done there. It just makes that suddenly seem more alive. So the first thing is we really want to make sure that all of our sounds seem alive. If your sounds don't seem alive, they'll always feel dead, therefore they will feel unengaging, and therefore doesn't matter how loud they are on the numbers, they'll never feel engaging or loud. So we add that, and the other is, there I did 3 or 4 videos in a row on various saturators. Put in a saturator, this is my favorite. Yeah, how it just brightens up. Becomes more present, more real. And we can hear it still. Hear how it's struggling to cut the mix. And then suddenly, even where it's been turned down a little bit because we've got our electric doing his, well, not so heroic lead, it's able to cut through and have presence. So saturation's a big part of getting a mix that's not necessarily loud in terms of numbers, but reaches forward. So we make sure that our sounds move, that they have a tone curve which suits what they need to do. While it's very tempting to go, well, I want it to be as full as possible, in reality, that fullness is just going to fight with the rest of the very full mix. We want to pull it forward to the bit where it does what we want to hear. It might make the sound thin, but within the mix, it does its job. Otherwise, it sounds thick in the mix, but it's buried underneath everything else. These are the essence of getting a mix that comes forward, where the parts present themselves. That's really, really important. And the other part of this, which I've alluded to a couple of times, and this is here. As I said, ideally, a lot of this is done in the composing, but it often ends up being done in the mixing as well if it hasn't been done by the composer. Here how we've got that guitar very forward, and it's also, if we mute this guy, even though through most of the mix it's off on the side, by starting it out on the side, it just doesn't have the same emotional impact as if we're in the center. So we want that to be in the center when it's the focus. I've also raised the level a little bit. Now it goes out to the side. And then when we get through this bit here, it gets quieter. It's still just there in the mix, but we don't really need to hear every statement of him going fling, 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 because, well, there's nothing new here. It's not like he's doing some cool thing here that we haven't already got, but the lead guitarist is, well, he's doing a lead. It's a terrible one, but he's doing a lead. Now, you'll see it gets quieter again. This acoustic guitar gets quieter again because our electric guitar gets louder. It gets grindier. If we pop him in solo here, you hear it suddenly like, ooh. This is because, well, there's no new content here. It's marginally different notes, but if it's just the same as it was before, we're going to lose interest in that. So by punching it up a little bit harder, the ear goes, ooh, something new, something different. So we've pulled back the acoustic a little bit further, pushed the electric forward a little bit more, and it adds more dynamic. Ideally, this would have been done by the composer, but if the composer was lazy, or hadn't thought about it, then it can be modified in the mix. It's not as good as a true player, let's say Gary Moore, would sort of go, okay, I'm going to do this here, and then I'm going to do that there, and then I'm going to blah, blah, here. So it adds dynamic, and it doesn't have to be. The reason I chose Gary Moore is because Gary didn't focus on playing fast most of the time. He could play sometimes one note that would be like, there's 16 bars of this one note. And it worked. He did it with style. So by moving things around, keeps movement. We move the individual sound here. Remember that acoustic guitar? We made it move around. We've made the dynamics of our whole piece move around here as well. Try to think of that when you're composing. Just going, oh, well, I've got my perfect loop, and therefore it'll just loop exactly the same over. No, it's a bad plan. Your piece may start sounding loud, but it'll sound nothing after a couple of goes round with that loop where nothing changes. Even if the singer is singing different words about the size of his party, the rest of the music will be exactly the same, and believe me, no one's that interested in the size of his party. Therefore, you need to have lots of movement, and you can get away with tremendous simplicity if you have very elegant movement. A great example of that is a song written by ABBA, covered by Blancmange. The Day Before You Came, I believe is the title of it. Blancmange, from the early 80s, about 83, had a hit with Living on the Ceiling. They were a kooky band. They were very, very cool. But they covered this ABBA song, and I think they bettered ABBA at it in making a little go a very long way, to steal from the Pet Shop Boys. So you can make a little go a long way with very careful management of the dynamics of the composition, or failing it being there, how the mix behaves. This is really important. Most people don't do this. And if there was a secret, that would probably be one of the biggest ones, not because it's secret at all, but just because most people are too lazy to do it, or they don't think to do it, which is kind of sad because it's free other than the time. But again, this is one of those things that a natural will feel and eventually do, and a not natural just won't feel it and won't do it. And even if they do it, they'll be trying to do it by force, and force won't get you there. All right, so that's a mix which is significantly louder than what we had before. Let's put all our bits and pieces back together. And then we come to the master. Okay, let's just pop everything out for the moment. Not overly exciting. There's that compressor, which is designed to create movement. Saturation. This is just checking levels. Pushing into the limiter. Normally I'd actually be doing it here, but it was easier to show here for people to see. I have some limiting, but I'm mostly relying on the soft clipper, because I'm clipping pretty heavily. If we were to put this into... Actually, it's not as much as I thought, but nonetheless there's quite a bit going on. I did allow a little bit of limiting, but it's on the slowish side, because I would still rather the soft clip, so that I get that louder, more dynamic result rather than the crushed limiting result. Now, here's one you probably don't expect. I haven't shown any EQ in here. It's not super necessary. We could clarify it, but it's just another layer of complex. Here's something that you can actually do. You can consider compressing again, because by the time we've gone through all of this, the clipping and everything, we've hacked a lot of our dynamic off. Remember how this lifted the dynamic of the piece? This has lifted the dynamic of the piece, and we've actually gotten another couple of dB. This is not a thing that I am going to recommend that you do, especially by rote, as in just do it because it's the way to get a louder mix. But if you have got this situation like me where you have made everything so loud that it's starting to become flat, you can actually impart a little bit more dynamic on it. We're simply forcing, saying, okay, well, this is our new top, and now we're going to create some little valleys around that. And it works. It's not the most beautiful way of doing it, but if your mix needs to be like this sort of oversized, massive, fat thing, then this will get you there and will allow you to have all that level, but still have a little bit more dynamic in it, as well as pushing some of your level at the same time as well. Because remember, your transient's very fast, but often it's after the transient, once you've dealt with transients being the problem, as in they're no longer spiking like 47 dB above zero, then often the issue comes a bit after. So if you compress, then you can actually get rid of that point which would have blown the levels, as all the sound just sort of fills out. Remember, a kick drum is actually click, whoomp. And I know we all want that whoomp, but if your mix is this busy, having a massive amount of whoomp is just wrecking your mix, wrecking your ability to turn the level up because it's too bassy. You need to pull away the bass and use the transient. You need the click to power through the mix and actually reduce the whoomp, which this will do to some extent. There's still some over there, and we're actually going to feel it emotionally, even though it's not actually there. Remember, all mixing is illusion. All recorded music is illusion, and mixing is about giving the illusion. Notice the difference in the illusion, the painted picture between this and this. Or if we turn this up, this no illusion in here at all. It's nasty. With this, which has nice space around it, it's a little crushed. And the other part is obviously just reverb, which I've spoken about before, using your send reverb and making sure that you are sending from the right place. Let's just pull this open. And the right place is, seeing we've bussed our drums and bass so that we can compress them and give them a nice feel, a rhythm, then we send from the bus, not from here. Otherwise, your reverb will delaminate and then it will seem too loud or not quiet or not right. Make sure it comes from here and set your reverb up. I always do mine, and so I can actually hear the reverb as I'm making it. This takes time. This is a real skill and experience thing. You can always do this and go, okay, that seems about right in terms of the shape and size and tone of the reverb. And then you mix it up here with your sends or your return, which would be masters, no reverb, reverb. It just adds a lot of body. It's a very simple way of taking remember that sound that's super clicky and transient, and adding a little bit more length to it, adding body to it. And with a good reverb, there's movement in that reverb as well, therefore it makes everything more alive. I would actually probably put saturation, this Hornet, on every single one of these, possibly even on the rhythm bus, although there's some saturation in this one. I would put it on the reverb as well, but I wouldn't be putting it in here because I'd actually be using this tape unit that I tend to use on everything. So I'd be going with this guy as my tape unit because it's got movement in it as well as some saturations and things like that. I'm not going to run it now because it may not sound any good. This is what you need to do to answer that question of, I can't seem to get my mix loud enough, but it clips. Because, well, sorry, your mix doesn't work. Hire a mix engineer is the right answer. An experienced mix engineer is like, remember I said, if you want to run a Formula One team or a surfing team and you don't hire somebody who's actually a skilled, experienced doer of this thing, you will fail. And you'll have wasted all your time and energy on your team. Because it's not really a team at all. Fair enough, it's a vanity. Just on the weekends you like to go out and throw your car around. That's all right, but that's not really a racing team. That's just a hobby. It's a whole other ball of wax. But if you're serious about it, then you can't act like a hobbyist. You have to act like a professional, which means work with people who are specialists in what they do. You wouldn't hire a mechanic for your racing team who was a good accountant simply because you liked him when you talked to him down the pub. You'd be like, who are the good racing engineers? Who can I get into my team? Who's dissatisfied over at McLaren? Who can I move over to me? These are the people that you want. Yeah, some of them might be really expensive, but you work your way there. But if you start by hiring the accountant because you reckon he's a great bloke when he's full of beer, expect the wheels to fall off your car and you'll just lose. And if that's amusing for you, then it's a hobby. But you need to be honest that it's a hobby. You're just playing games. Fair enough. Your business. If you are going to take this on yourself, get rid of this whole idea that there is a simple fix or that there are advanced techniques or hidden secrets, because there are none. Absolutely none. I have not met any techniques since my early days. But sidechaining, sir. Sidechaining is actually ducking, and ducking was well established. I remember using it. We made the radio jingles, so we would duck the music when the guy was talking about, and now we've added steak knives. We would duck the music. So it's not a new technique. Yes, it was a little different when whoever did it to make the pads in the synth music go whoop, whoop, every time the kick drum went. That was a different application of it, but there was no new technology. There was no difference in how it was done. It was just oh, okay, I don't think I've heard anyone do it that way before, because largely doing that was considered really, really bad practice. If you were mixing a rock song and your drums were causing the rest of it to pump like that, then it was like, you got it wrong. That doesn't mean that it wasn't used from time to time. I've done it deliberately sometimes in my own pieces to get this sense of everything being really overbearing. I've used, without the side chaining thing, I have used the drums to duck the rest of everything else, just to be so loud that everything else goes and can't compete. Deliberate. People didn't like the results because they felt like it was overbearing, and it's like, that's the whole plan. That's why the piece was called what it was called. That's a case of just, I guess, listening for what they wanted rather than listening to the art. So if you are going to push through and do it, really, before you do, ask, am I suited to this? If you're not understanding that in the first place and therefore asking the internet the question, it's like, oh, well, I can't get my mix loud enough, but it just clips, and you've not got a sense of what might be wrong there, then it's entirely possible you're not suited to this. That it's like me hopping on Kelly Slater's surfboard and wondering why I die. Because I'm not suited to surfing, no matter how great the surfboard is. Which is, of course, don't go out and buy pro plugins, because there's no such thing as a pro plugin. You'll see that I don't really use much of anything in terms of big name things. I'll make my own, or I will use things that are actually really great tools, and they do their job really, really well. Do I have anything against those other tools? Well, they cost a whole pile of money, and more often than not, they don't have the kind of character I'm looking for. I'm looking for character, especially if I'm using a character device. I don't want one that's bland. I'm not saying don't use them, but going out and spending $150 on something you don't really know how to use is not going to suddenly make you good. You never pick a craftsman by his tools. Matter of fact, if a guy shows up and all his tools are really expensive and all brand spanking shiny new, I'd be a little concerned. I'd rather have an old guy turn up with a screwdriver that looks like he got it from his grandfather who bought it in 1912, because that probably says we have a craftsman here who's from a family of craftsmen. It's in their blood. Somebody who turns up with perfect shiny tools, it's like, okay, you've got to let him run if your toilet's overflowed, but it's entirely possible that he's more interested in his tools. If a guy walks in to my place to fix my toilet and starts showing me his spanner and going, look at my spanner, I'd be like, yeah, look at the backside of my foot, because you're not the guy I'm looking for. I'll go and try and find some old guy with a spanner from 1912 because he understands toilets. He's still in business. Don't be one of them. Work out what you're going to do. If you are going to push through with this, really, you're going to need to watch this video and the other things that I've pointed to quite a few times, because you've got to actually train yourself to be able to see, hear, feel these things that a natural will feel. Kelly Slater could talk to you, was blue in the face about the surf and how to feel the wave. And while I would pick up a certain amount of it because I would be taking parallels, that's like when I feel this thing in the mix. That gives me a leg up. If I was a guitarist, then I'd be like, okay, that's how, okay, I can feel that when I'm doing a this into a that, then that happens. That's a parallel. I don't know, because I don't play guitar. Stupid things, they don't work. They're broken. There's something wrong with them. Then you've got to train yourself to be able to feel these things. If you've got some sort of ability like playing guitar, then find the parallels. And do not ever assume that this is just a technical thing, that if you can get so many tips and tricks or know to turn the knob to here, that you're suddenly going to get the results you want. All you'll do is face plant. You'll crash your surfboard. It's not cool at all, and I hate seeing that kind of stuff, you know. Actually, I went into a new store. Guy who's come from Sydney, big city below us in New South Foreign Land. And he came up and he said he's really surprised because in Sydney, the musicians all kind of know and interact with each other. And he said he's come up here and it's really weird. People don't seem to network or interact with each other. And I'm like, and I find it online too. I mean, he was a rather gregarious sort of Eastern European sort of a fellow, Mediterranean, shall we say, and so he was a bit. But he seemed like a nice enough fellow, and he's just setting up his shop, and good on him. I was much happier with him than the other Aussie bloke who kind of chases me out of his shop like I'm trying to steal his guitars or something. I don't want to steal his guitars; they're useless. Unless I can sell them on eBay, they're useless. Stupid things don't work. People don't talk, they don't engage, they don't create. And this is not an offer, but I've been amazed over the years where I've heard somebody's song and really quite liked what they've got and reached out and said, hey, look, I like what you got. Can I mix it? Because your mixing's a real problem here. But this I can do. I can do better for you. And more often than not, you know what the answer is? Either no, or you're not cool, how dare you suggest that I'm not the best in the world at doing this, or yeah, I know, but I was only playing around. You know, if Alan Parsons or even CLA came to me and said, Benedict, I like your track here, I do, I'd like to hear it mixed done a little bit differently, can you just, send it over to me, let me have a play with it, I'll send you what I get. No, don't worry, I'm not going to charge you for this. I just want to do this. You know what I'm going to do? Export. There you go, Mr. Allen, Mr. CLA. Have at it. I'm delighted. I'm flattered that you're asking. Do what you can. I'll be delighted to hear what you got. That's normal. Create relationships. Create relationships is a big part of how do I get my things to work when they don't seem to naturally work. Because you're not the guy to fix this problem. You need to build a team of people who are the guys to fix this problem, which is why, if you haven't seen it, go watch the film The Dirt. It's not great, but it's amusing enough. The moral of this story is you see as they put the band together, they need to find the right fit. They need to find a guitarist, a bass player, a drummer, and then particularly they need to find a front man. Not a singer, but they need to find a front man for Motley Crue. They need to get the right parts in. Same happened with Iron Maiden. Their first singer, Paul Di'Anno, yes, they got them that far, but then they needed a better front man. They got Bruce Dickinson. Awesome, one of the best frontmen in the game. He wandered away for a bit, and they tried another guy, and it really didn't work very well. And Bruce came back, and boom, Maiden straight back up where they belonged. Priest, Judas Priest, exactly the same. They had an original singer and they only got so far with him. They got Rob Halford, who was the right fit. And that classic Priest lineup, Tipton, Downing, Halford, Hill, and whoever's playing drums, their drummers tended to move around. That's classic Priest. That's how they got as far as they got over all of those years. Find the right fit. So really important. And I'm going on about this, but this is the most important part of the answer is to, if you can't feel it, don't do it. Get somebody else in. You running around saying, I'll strum this, and then I'll run over there and I'll pick a bass line, and then I'll run back and I'll go do-do-do-do-do-do, and then I'll go over there and press a chord, and then I'll run round and go whoop into the microphone, is just absurd. But then people do this when they try to put their stuff together. No, you actually need a unit, a collection of people who become greater than the whole. Because where Motley Crue people have gone off and had solo records, how well have they done on the charts? Well, next. All right, so we've covered a bit of ground, and I've pointed to a lot of other videos. Please spend your time on those if you are going to insist on trying to learn to do this yourself. And remember, you need to undo the fibs about that there are advanced techniques or that there are secrets or that you can just do this to fix a mix which is fundamentally broken. If it doesn't seem loud enough and is clipping, then it is very fundamentally broken. It doesn't mean it's not fixable, but if you don't know how to fix it and you don't have then you're not feeling it, you're not hearing it until it's too late. If that's the case, then you've got to train yourself to actually be able to see, hear, and feel these things at least as much as you can. But once you get to the point of, like me, if I could surf in a wave this big, going up against a 10-meter wave at Hawaii, I've got to look and I've got to go, is that really a wise idea for me to do? You know, I might be winning against the local 4-year-olds, but am I going to win in this competition? In which case, then I should hop on the phone and say, hey, Kelly, I've got my team to Hawaii. These waves, they are, well, underpants, dirty and frightening. Can you come on out for me? This is what you need. Okay, if you have any questions about the content, please make sure you've watched the video first. Pop them on down below. If you're asking about how to fix your mix, really you should be hiring somebody, but I don't mind a little bit, but the rules are very, very simple and clear. You must show your mix publicly. If you don't link us to your mix and explain what you feel is wrong, then we're not going to answer you. We'll probably just delete you. Because I'll only do this publicly if it's training for everybody. And if you go, oh, well, I'll do it and then I'll delete it afterwards, then we'll delete the whole thread afterwards too. So there's no getting a free run. So show exactly what you want, and then be involved in the discussion afterwards. If you say, oh, here's my thing, and then you say nothing when you get the information back or get narky, then we'll probably again just delete everything, because you're not actually doing it the right way. You know, it's just like if I hire Kelly Slater and he lobs up and I just walk up and punch him in the face and say, yeah, you better get out there and win, Kelly. I imagine he's just going to get back in his Jeep and drive away, probably after kicking me in the... but make sure that we behave with dignity here. Okay, that's it. My name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. If you have been intrigued by Hertz Multiplier or Hertz Delay in their role in helping improve mixes, they are freebies. Go to higherhertz.com and of course go back and have a look through our videos, find the other things that I have pointed to. Most importantly, get out there, practice, have a great day.